I came here with a presentation about 33 reasons why one ought to believe that there's a missing text of the third secret of Fatima. But after today, we have 35 reasons. We picked up 2 more today, and I'll discuss that in the course of my presentation. But I wonder if we all appreciate what happened here today. Just briefly, I would say we've had a couple of explosive admissions, and one of them would be that there was apparently a letter, a so-called piece of private correspondence from Archbishop Capaldi to Cardinal Bertone, in which we were told today Capaldi supposedly retracts his testimony to Sole Deo Paolini, but we were told we were not able to see that because it's private correspondence. Apparently this is the kind of private correspondence you can mention and talk about publicly, but you can't show anybody. And one wonders why people are suspicious about the state of the question concerning the third secret of Fatima. But let me begin by saying that it occurs to me that this is not really that controversial a matter among rank-and-file Catholics. I've talked to my parish priest, for example. I've talked to Catholics that I know at my chapel in New Jersey. I've talked to people at these conferences, of course. And as a matter of fact, I really can't find anybody who knows anything about the subject that doesn't believe something is missing. So actually, it turns out, ironically enough, that the minority position would appear to be those who cling steadfastly to the notion that an ambiguous vision of a bishop dressed in white outside a half-ruined city is all there is to the third secret, even though that vision has given rise to a multitude of interpretations. And I would begin this presentation by noting that someone whose orthodoxy and loyalty to the Vatican is not open to question, Mother Angelica of the Eternal Word Television Network, sort of got the ball rolling in May of 2001 when she said, "As for the secret, I happen to be one of those individuals who thinks we didn't get the whole thing." I mean, you have the right to your own opinion, don't you, Father? There, you know, that's my opinion, because I think it's scary. And she said that on Mother Angelica Live. Apparently they have a TV audience that numbers potentially in the millions. And she just casually made that remark, but it's a reflection of what Catholics in general believed about a year after the Vatican published the vision of the Bishop in White on June 26, 2000. So what we're going to discuss today is the reasons I believe there is a missing text. And when we look at these reasons, what we're talking about, I hate to reduce it to a kind of legal inquest or investigation. It almost trivializes a matter of great significance for the Church and the world, but I don't see any other way to approach this. Antonio Socci calls this un giallo, which is the Vatican or the Italian term for a mystery novel. It's like a thriller or a mystery novel. Un giallo in Vaticano, he calls it. There's a mystery going on in the Vatican. It has the aspect of a detective story, and it's really the only way to approach it, because when you approach it as a detective story and you begin to assemble the evidence involved, it's like putting together a puzzle. When you have only one piece for the puzzle, you really don't know where this puzzle is going in terms of the picture that will emerge. When you have the 4 corners of the puzzle, it becomes a lot clearer. And when we reach a certain number of pieces in place in this puzzle, only one picture can emerge. And that's the picture I'm going to indicate for you today. And this is a conclusion that I resisted. I didn't want to become the proponent of a crazy conspiracy theory. I'm a civil attorney in the United States. Humanly speaking, I have a reputation to be concerned about. I'm not interested in what the Italians call dietrologie, which are these theories of mysterious doings behind the scenes, despite all appearances of normality in public. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized, as Antonio Socci did, that the evidence points to only one conclusion. There simply has to be something missing. And what you heard today from Mr. DiCarli, I believe, confirms that abundantly. And I'll get to that in the course of the talk. But today we're going to talk about essentially what would be 33 reasons. And I'm not going to spend much time on each reason, and I hope to keep this talk to about 45 minutes, but let's look at these reasons one by one. Number 1, we know that the secret involves a letter to the Bishop of Fatima. As Lucia said to Father Young in 1946, I communicated the third part in a letter to the Bishop of Leiria, Fatima. And as we know from John the 23rd's diary, Father Philippe, commissary of the Holy Office, brought to him the letter containing the third part of the Secrets of Fatima. And we know from the famous Vatican-initiated press release in 1960, and I'm quoting, it is most likely, said the Vatican, through ANI, that the letter will never be opened, in which Sister Lucia wrote down the words, which Our Lady confided as a secret to the three little shepherds in Cova de Iria. So it's clear we're dealing with something in the nature of a letter. Reason number two, we know the secret contains words of Our Lady of Fatima. The key proof here, before we get to the testimony of Archbishop Capovilla, is the interview conducted by Father Schweigel, an American Jesuit, sent on a mission to interrogate Sister Lucia, apparently by the papal nuncio, presumably on orders of Pius XII. And he revealed, in part of his statement, that the secret involves logically the continuation of the words. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, to which Sister Lucy added her famous etc. And that telltale phrase has been at the heart of this controversy ever since it began. We also know from the ANI press release that I just mentioned that the secret involves the words, which Our Lady confided as a secret to the three little shepherds. Words that Our Lady spoke. Not an ambiguous vision, but actual heavenly dictation, as it were, by the Virgin Mary. We know from the statement of Cardinal Ottaviani in 1967, who also interrogated Sister Lucia, that she wrote, and I'm quoting, on a sheet of paper, foglia in Portuguese, folio in Italian, what Our Lady told her to tell the Holy Father. Our Lady said something to the visionaries. She did not simply present an unexplained vision. Reason number three, we know the secret speaks of a coming apostasy in the Church. For example, we know from the statement of Bishop Alberto Cosmo da Amaral, the Bishop of Fatima, that its content, and I'm quoting, concerns only our faith. The loss of faith of a continent is far worse than the annihilation of a nation. Now, as the Bishop of Fatima with access to the Fatima archives and access to Sister Lucia, he would certainly know what he's talking about. We also know from Cardinal Ratzinger's famous statement in 1984, a couple of months after the first statement I've just quoted, that the secret involves dangers threatening the faith and the life of the Christian and therefore of the world. So there's an indication of a twin chastisement in the offing for the Church and the world. Dangerous to the faith, accompanied by a threat to the life of the whole world. We know from the statement in 1995 of Cardinal Chiappi, a papal theologian. In the third secret, it is foretold, among other things, that the great apostasy in the Church begins at the top. Now, Cardinal Chiappi was not a man to toss around such declarations lightly. This was not cocktail party talk. This was a serious statement about what he evidently knew to be involved in the third secret of Fatima, a coming apostasy beginning at the top. And we know from John Paul II's enigmatic but nonetheless revealing statement at Fatima on May 13, 2000, that the message of Fatima involves the tail of the dragon, whose tail, and I'm quoting, swept down a third of the stars of heaven and cast them to the earth. And the traditional interpretation of that passage in the book of the Apocalypse, chapter 12, verse 4, is the fall of consecrated souls from their exalted stations, being cast down to the earth. And what have we seen in the Church, if not that? Pius XII backed up this statement, and I uncovered this myself in my research. I'll give you the statement in full. This is a statement from his biography by Monsignor Roche, entitled Pius XII Before History. He had a conversation in the Apostolic Palace in 1931, when he was still the Secretary of State, serving under Pope Pius XI. And he explicitly linked a coming crisis in the Church to none other than the message of Fatima. I am worried by the Blessed Virgin's messages to little Lucia of Fatima. This persistence of Mary about the dangers which menace the Church is a divine warning against the suicide of altering the faith in her liturgy, her theology, and her soul. Now imagine the future Pius XII making such a prediction about the state of the Catholic Church in 1931. It must have seemed like a crazy prophecy. And he went on to say, I hear all around me innovators who wish to dismantle the sacred chapel. Sound familiar? Destroy the universal flame of the Church, reject her ornaments, and make her feel remorse for her historical past. Have we not seen a program of making the Church apologize for her sins? Have we not seen ceremonies to that effect? Embarrassing and scandalous ceremonies? A day will come, Pius XII went on to say, when the civilized world will deny its God, when the Church will doubt, as Peter doubted. She will be tempted to believe that man has become God. In our churches, Christians will search in vain for the red lamp where God awaits them. Like Mary Magdalene weeping before the empty tomb, they will ask, where have they taken him? And how many times have we gone into churches looking for the sanctuary lamps that disappeared after 1960, the year the secret was supposed to have been revealed? And here is Pius XII predicting precisely that development in 1931, 31 years before the commencement of the Second Vatican Council. And because this is such an important proof text, I provided the source, the biography by Monsignor Roche, Pius XII Before History. It took me 6 months to get this, pages 52 and 53. And there's more in those passages that I can't get into now because we're limited on time. Now, what does the vision of the Bishop in White say about a coming apostasy, about the suicide of altering the faith in the liturgy of the Church, in her theology and her soul? Nothing. Or as the Italians say, nulla. And the conclusion? Something is missing. Something clearly is missing. Reason number 4, the mysterious etc., the heart of the controversy. We know from the 4th memoir that Sister Lucia added a telltale phrase to the integral text of the Great Secret of Fatima. It appears to be an entry into the last part of the second part of the Great Secret, which will be the commencement of the third part of the Great Secret, or the third secret. In Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved, etc. And that phrase has bedeviled the Vatican ever since, because it contains a hint of a coming apostasy. Because the obvious implication is that if the dogma of the faith will be preserved in Portugal, evidently the dogmas will not be preserved elsewhere, which keys in with what Pius XII, the future Pius XII, predicted in 1931. And I asked the question in my book, why did they avoid the 4th memoir? When the Vatican published the vision of the Bishop in White in 2000, June 26, 2000, it published along with it a commentary. And in that commentary, it made explicit reference to the fact that for some peculiar reason, the Vatican decided not to use the 4th memoir, which is obviously more recent and more complete, and to which Sister Lucia had added that telltale phrase about Portugal. The Vatican avoided the 4th memoir and used the 3rd memoir to obtain the text of the secret, the Great Secret of Fatima, the Message of Fatima, which was published in the Vatican booklet. And it explained in a footnote that, yes, there is a 4th memoir, and Sister Lucia added some annotations, as the Vatican commentary describes them. But these annotations are a direct quotation of the words of the Mother of God predicting a dogmatic crisis in the Church. And it has to arouse suspicion that the Vatican would not use the 4th memoir. That in itself, if you're an attorney investigating this case, indicates grounds for suspicion. They had the 4th memoir, they avoided the 4th memoir. Why? So they would not have to discuss the implications of, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. If they were not afraid of what that phrase implies, what it contains, where it points to, they would simply have taken the bull by the horns and addressed it. But they didn't. They consigned it to a footnote, and they took the position, which I say is a pretense, that it was merely some annotations by Sister Lucia. And the conclusion we draw? Something is missing. Reason number 5, Our Lady does not explain the vision of the bishop in white. Now, we know, all of us at this point, that Our Lady clearly explains the vision of hell, which was something patently obvious. They could see the souls suffering torments in hell. They saw it so vividly, they were terrified of it. And perhaps, Lucia said, they would have died of fright if that vision had not been terminated when it was. So terrifying was it to behold. And yet Our Lady said to them afterwards, "You have seen hell, where the souls of poor sinners go." Well, they knew they had seen hell. They didn't need to be told that. They knew what they had seen. But Our Lady nevertheless explained it. But we're asked to believe that Our Lady does not explain the vision of the bishop dressed in white outside a half-ruined city, being executed by soldiers beneath a wooden cross made of cork bark. And this is all apparently perfectly clear to us, or so we're told. And what has happened is what I call a la carte interpretations. Because we have no explanation from Our Lady, we have all of these a la carte interpretations. Pick one from column A or one from column B. Some people say that the vision relates to the 20th century, past events. Others say it relates to a future apocalyptic scenario. And still others say, well, it's a combination of the past, the present, and the future. Some people say it's a pope being executed in the future, as we do. Other people say it's John Paul II not being executed in 1981. Take your pick. And then we have the war of interpretations. And then we have Mr. DeCarli coming here with his book saying, well, this is the official position, until I asked him whether it had any doctrinal force, and he admitted no, it really didn't. It's just a private publication. So we're in the midst of a war of interpretations. We have, obviously, confusion and division in the church. And so the question that has to be asked is, did Our Lady come to cause confusion? Obviously, she did not come to cause confusion, because it's quite impossible for Our Lady to cause confusion in the church. She is the seat of wisdom, not the seat of confusion. And so if confusion has arisen over the vision of the bishop in white, it can only be the case that, as I conclude, something is missing. There can be no other explanation. I would say the mere fact that we have this war of interpretations going on over what this ambiguous vision means is in itself a practically decisive proof that we have had something withheld from us by way of explanation, the Virgin's explanation, the only explanation that would settle the question. Reason number 6, we know the secret has 2 parts. We know it because of the Father Schweigel interview that I mentioned a few moments ago. Remember what he said. I cannot reveal anything of what I learned at Fatima concerning the 3rd secret, but I can say that it has 2 parts. One concerns the Pope. The other, logically, although I must say nothing, would have to be the continuation of the words, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. Well, that's precisely our thesis, explicitly confirmed by a witness who interrogated the seer. We're dealing with a secret that's comprised of 2 parts. One concerns the Pope, that would be the vision. The Pope is executed outside a half-ruined city. And the other part would be, logically, the continuation of the words, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. Which is why I maintain the Vatican went to the 3rd memoir instead of the 4th memoir. Because the 4th memoir opens up the inquiry to this entire problem of the telltale reference to Portugal. Now, the vision, as I say on the slide, contains no words of Our Lady. And what is the conclusion we reach from that? We have only one part, the part that pertains to the Pope. Reason number 7, we know the secret involves a text of 25 lines on a single page. Now, Mr. DeCarli was confronted with that testimony today by Father Gruner. Cardinal Bertone admits that there has been testimony by Cardinal Ottaviani that there is a text consisting of 25 lines. And Mr. DeCarli's answer today to the discrepancy between this text of 25 lines and the text of the vision, which is 62 lines, is non so. I don't know. He had no explanation, except that, according to Cardinal Bertone, the Cardinal was mistaken. Now, Bishop Venancio, I note here parenthetically, saw indeed only one sheet inside that famous envelope that he held up to the light. He did not see multiple sheets comprising 62 lines. Reason number 8, as I've mentioned, Cardinal Bertone admits it. When and where did he admit that? On May 31st, 2007, on the Porta a Porta television show, Cardinal Bertone said this, not me, Cardinal Bertone, that Cardinal Ottaviani had stated categorically, a text of 25 lines. So he stipulates to the admission of that evidence, so to speak, he stipulates to the fact that Cardinal Ottaviani had before him a text of 25 lines. What is his explanation for this? This is what Bertone said on television. It may be that he was mistaken. It may be. Let's pause over that phrase. It may be that he was mistaken. Now, Cardinal Bertone would be in a position to know of a certainty whether Ottaviani was mistaken. He has access to all the documents. He has access to all the witnesses. He has access to all the archives. He could have made inquiries that would have determined categorically that Ottaviani was mistaken. Instead, he says, maybe he was mistaken. Is that the declaration of a man who's quite certain that Ottaviani is wrong, or is it perhaps the declaration of someone who suspects that Ottaviani might be correct? And then he goes on to say, I don't believe that this element is so convincing as to say that there exists a sheet of paper, folio, of 25 lines. He doesn't think it's so convincing? Consider the implications of that phrase. He's saying this is a debatable issue, but he doesn't think it's so convincing that Cardinal Ottaviani said there was a text of 25 lines. Well, if he knew the truth of a certainty, if he knew we're dealing with only one text of 62 lines, why would he be speaking this way? He would be saying this is completely ridiculous. The Cardinal is absolutely wrong. The archives do not show the existence of any such document. He was simply dead wrong. No, he says, it's not that convincing. What inference do you draw from that? That he knows perhaps that there's something to what Ottaviani said. He made an attempt to explain on television. He knew he had a problem with the 25 lines. So there was a commercial break. I watched this transcript. I made this television broadcast. I made my own transcript of it. I read it multiple times. It was a 4-minute commercial break. And he comes back after the break and he makes an attempt to explain how Ottaviani could have said 25 lines when the vision is 62 lines. And his explanation was basically, well, Ottaviani must have taken 2 pages of the 4-page vision and somehow conflated them into one document. But the only problem with that explanation is no 2 pages add up to 25 lines. They add up to 30 lines or 32 lines. Now, as I argue in the book, he had to have known that that's the case. He had to have known that that was a contrivance. He had to have known that 30 lines is not 25 lines, that 32 lines is not 25 lines. He had to have known that when Cardinal Ottaviani said 25 lines, as the very custodian of the third secret, he could not have made such a mistake. He could not have confused 62 with 25. But that was his attempt at an explanation. He had years to prepare an attempt at an explanation, and that's what he came up with after the 4-minute commercial break. It simply is incredible. Because the text is 62 lines, not 25 lines. The conclusion? The text of 25 lines is missing. I don't see how you can reach any other conclusion based on that evidence. Reason number 9, there's a text in the papal apartment. That's been well established now, despite attempts to deny it earlier. We know that this text, therefore, is not in the Holy Office archives. The text that the Vatican is talking about, the text of the vision, is located in the Holy Office archives. It's retrieved from the archives, it's read, and it's brought back to the archives, not to the papal apartment. And yet we know there was also a text in the papal apartment. We know also from the testimony of Robert Serrou in 1947. He went into the papal apartment, and 57, and he went in and took a photograph of the little wooden safe in which the secret labeled Secret of the Holy Office, and Mother Pasqualina, the housekeeper for Pius XII, was asked, what's in this little safe? And she answered, the third secret of Fatima is in there. And the date on that slide should be 57, not 47. So we know there's a text of the third secret of Fatima in a little wooden safe in the papal apartment in 1957. And that was published in Paris Match magazine on 2 occasions to commemorate the death of Pius XII. This was further confirmed by a letter of June 20th, 1977 from Monsignor Capaldi, our living eyewitness, to Father Jose Heraldez Friere, that the secret was, quote, kept in the writing table of John XXIII's apartment until his death. And on July 24th, 1977, another letter from Capaldi to Father Alonso, the official Fatima archivist, stating, Pope John kept a text of the secret in the bureau of his bedroom until his death, not in the Holy Office archives. And then on January 10th, 1985, the photographer Seru wrote to Frere Michel, a world-renowned expert on the whole subject, to advise as follows. It is exact that Mother Pasqualina did tell me in there, meaning the wooden safe, photographed for Paris Match magazine, is the third secret of Fatima. Conclusion. 2 different locations means 2 different texts. To me, it's completely obvious. It's one of the reasons I came to the conclusion I did. There has to be a missing text. Reason number 10, we have a text that is rendered in difficult Portuguese. Now, today you saw a video in which Monsignor Capaldi said, yes, I did say repeatedly, orally and in writing, that there was a text with very difficult Portuguese expressions. But I was wrong because I didn't understand Portuguese. Well, just a moment. If you didn't understand Portuguese, every Portuguese expression would be difficult to you. How would you know the difference between a particularly difficult Portuguese expression and a regular Portuguese expression? So clearly, someone told him. It had to be either Father Tavares or the Pope himself, whose personal secretary Capaldi was. Someone had to tell him that this text involved particularly difficult Portuguese expressions that John XXIII could not understand. That's how he knew it. Precisely because he did not know Portuguese. And now, 40 years later, after having been approached by Mr. De Carli and perhaps other representatives of Cardinal Bertone, he suddenly says, oh, well, that was just a mistake. I retract my lifetime worth of testimony. Oral and written, he has confirmed, that this text involved difficult Portuguese expressions. So we know that on August 17th, 1959, John XXIII read a text that required a translation by Father Tavares. But we also know that in 1960, Cardinal Taviani reported that John XXIII read a text of the secret he had no trouble understanding. So now you know why, after 40 years, I would submit to you, Capaldi suddenly retracts his testimony about the difficult Portuguese expressions. Why would he suddenly retract this testimony? Why? After 40 years. Because clearly he knows, they know, we know, that it points to the existence of 2 different texts. A difficult Portuguese text and a not-so-difficult Portuguese text, the latter of which the Pope had no trouble understanding. So we have yet another indication of 2 different texts. Reason number 11. The text of the vision published in 2000 contains no difficult Portuguese expressions. And Antonio Socci, in his book, indicates that the linguist he hired, I think her name is Maria Ringrazio. What's her name, Father? Maria Grazio, a name of that sort. I forget her name at this moment, but he hired a linguist. She prepared an appendix for his book. She analyzed the text of the vision and found nothing particularly idiomatic or difficult about it, which is precisely in accord with the lifetime's worth of testimony by Monsignor Capaldi. Conclusion we reach from this, there are 2 different texts, and we have seen only one, the one that does not contain particularly difficult Portuguese. And Antonio Socci agrees. Here's what he says. These 2 opposed pieces of information can be explained by considering that the matter involves 2 readings of 2 different texts. And that's from page 148 of his book. Reason number 12. We know there are 2 different Italian translations of a text of the third secret of Fatima. We know, as I've just explained, that there was a translation in 1959 by Father Tavares, and we also know from the Porta a Porta telecast that there is another translation of a text of the secret prepared in 1967. Cardinal Bertone displayed the envelope containing that translation on camera during the Porta a Porta telecast, but he did not display what was inside the envelope. What happens when someone displays an envelope to you and doesn't show you what's inside the envelope? Why, you become suspicious. And you add to the grounds for suspicion that permeate this whole case. We have not been shown either translation. Why not? Why would he show us the envelope containing a translation and not show us the translation? I ask myself. Why not? Why haven't we seen them? The conclusion I draw is we have two different translations because there are two different texts. Another piece of the puzzle falls into place. Reason number 13. We know, as I've already indicated in part, that 3 different popes read texts of the third secret in 2 different years during each of their respective pontificates. Now, how do they explain this fact? We know that John the 23rd read a text in August of 1959, the difficult Portuguese text, and another text in 1960. We know that Paul VI, according to the official confidential note of Monsignor Capaldi, read a text of the secret in 1963 within days of his election to the papacy, the text in Barbarigo, the writing desk in the papal bedchamber. And we also know, according to the official account defended by Mr. De Carli, that according to the Vatican's version of events, Paul VI did not read a text of the secret until 1965, 2 years later. How do they explain that discrepancy? And it was precisely that discrepancy that broke this case wide open, as I'll tell you in a moment. John Paul II, we know, read a text in 1978 and 1981. So that's 2 readings by 3 different popes in 2 different years during their respective pontificates. Is that a coincidence? Or is it another fact that indicates what is becoming increasingly obvious as we move through these slides? There simply has to be a missing text. And that's the conclusion. 2 different readings mean 2 different texts. Maybe once you could explain it away, but twice and then 3 times by 3 different popes, you can't explain that away. Reason number 14. Cardinal Bertone evades the first reading by John Paul II. This is fascinating. In De Carli's book, this is one of the few tough questions De Carli posed to Bertone in L'ultima Vigenta di Fatima, the last visionary of Fatima. He said, look, we had a press account, the press quoted Joaquim Navarro Val, the papal spokesman for John Paul II, as having said that within days of his election to the papacy, John Paul II read a text of the third secret of Fatima. What do you say to that? He pressed him on that issue 3 times in the pages of that book. And the official account, as we know, claims that John Paul II read the secret 3 years after his election to the papacy, more or less. That the Pope of Fatima, and this is what De Carli was saying to Bertone in the book, do you mean to tell me that the Pope of Fatima would wait 3 years to take a look at what's inside that envelope when his predecessors did so very shortly after their election to the papacy? Why would he wait 3 years to do that? And he's pressed on this again and again, and finally Bertone offers the explanation in his own book, mind you, that the reason John Paul II waited 3 years is, get this, he was too busy re-evangelizing the world. Now, what could be more important to the project of the new evangelization than a secret that warns of a coming apostasy in the church and a global catastrophe? I think that would figure prominently in anyone's plans for re-evangelizing the world. But in less visionary, Bertone says, in my opinion, John Paul II did not read a text of the secret in 1978. Let me dwell on that, in my opinion. Now, again, this is someone with access to all of the records, someone who had years to think of a response, someone who had every means available to put to rest this lie, if a lie it was, that John Paul II read a text of the secret in 1978. All he had to do was ask John Paul II, who was still alive until 2005. All he had to do was get Navarro Valls to deny that he had said that to the press. But he didn't. Because, I maintain, and it's obvious, he couldn't. Navarro Valls wouldn't deny that he said that to the press because he did say it. And John Paul II wouldn't deny that he read a text of the secret in 1978 because he did read a text of the secret in 1978. And therefore, Bertone is reduced to saying, in my opinion, as to something that was not a matter of opinion. which could have been confirmed as false if, in fact, it were false. And now it's obvious that it couldn't be false because he did not get that confirmation. Reason number 15. We've heard endlessly about this, the Capovilla envelope. We had a major confrontation here today about the Capovilla envelope. And what did Mr. DiCarli say about the Capovilla envelope as I struggled to interrogate him in Italian? He basically retreated to the position that the Capovilla envelope is the same as the Bertone envelope, the envelope that Bertone showed on porta a porta, and we simply didn't see what was on the back of that envelope on camera. Well, we did see it. It's in my book. We have a picture of the back of the envelope. And you know from the book and from other things I've written that Monsignor Capaldi revealed that there is an envelope in the papal apartment, not the Holy Office archives, that on that envelope is his name, the names of all who had read the contents of the Capovilla envelope, and the judgment of John the 23rd that he would leave it to others to comment or decide what to do about the text. And DiCarli's explanation today was all that information was on the back of the envelope. You just didn't see the back during the telecast. Look in the book, you'll see there's a copy of the still shot we took from the telecast of porta a porta. We see the back of the envelope. There's nothing on the back of that envelope but a single seal and white space. So I would politely but firmly suggest to Mr. DiCarli that perhaps under the pressure of the moment, we have seen an invention. Because clearly, the envelope displayed on the camera is not the Capovilla envelope, no matter what Mr. DiCarli says today. And we have the oral and written testimony of Capovilla about the nature of that envelope. No one can deny today that there's an envelope with all of these historic notations on it that we have never, ever seen. And we know that that envelope is in the papal apartment, and no one, not even the Vatican, not even Bertone, not even DiCarli can deny the existence of it. All DiCarli can say is, well, look on the back, that's where it was. And it wasn't. Reason 16. We know that Paul VI read and resealed the Capovilla envelope. Consider that carefully. The envelope we're talking about with all of these notations was opened by Paul VI and then resealed. The envelope that Bertone displayed on porta a porta was not the envelope with those notations and was certainly not an envelope that Paul VI had resealed after reading its contents. We know from the written documentation provided by Monsignor Capaldi that that envelope was opened and resealed in 1963 after being retrieved from Pope John's desk, and that he, like John the 23rd, decided to leave it to others to decide what to do about this problematical text. So he put it back in the envelope and resealed it. And he says nothing further about it to Capaldi. Now, during the telecast on porta a porta, or rather in a subsequent telecast in September of 2000, Cardinal Bertone presented a snippet of videotape in which Mr. DiCarli, who is here today, issues a blatantly leading question. So along the lines of, so Paul VI read the same secret twice, didn't he? Yes, he read it in 1963, and then he read it again in 1965, didn't he? It was the same secret, wasn't it? Wasn't it? And all that Capaldi had to say was yes, but he didn't quite say yes. He bobbed and weaved on that issue. He said something like, I will tell you more. I don't believe there's a fourth secret. But he didn't answer the question whether Paul VI read the same secret twice. After resealing the envelope in 1965, he opened up the envelope again and read the same contents, which is nonsensical. He never answered that question because it's obvious that that's not what happened. It makes no sense. If he had decided to leave it to others to decide, if he had resealed the envelope in 1963, why would he open up the same envelope again? You see here a bit of desperation in play. They have a major problem. There's a Capovilla envelope. They haven't produced it. It has all these notations on it. People are now concluding there must be a text inside that envelope. So he has to ask Monsignor Capaldi to basically conjecture that, well, he must have reopened it and read it again. But, as Capaldi says in his own testimony during that telecast in September 2007, I don't know what happened. after Paul VI resealed the envelope in 1963. He never spoke about it to me again. So DeCarli put words in Capovilla's mouth and had him affirm something that Capovilla really couldn't have known because he had no knowledge of the matter. So my question is, where is the Capovilla envelope? We pressed repeatedly for an answer to that question today, and we didn't get it. All we got was what I would respectfully submit, with all due respect to Mr. DeCarli, all we got was an evasion that is patently false. And the next question, why has Cardinal Bertone declined to produce on camera, in person, why has he failed to produce in any forum at any time this envelope, which he now admits exists? It's indisputable at this point. There's another envelope out there that was in the papal apartment. No one can deny that it exists, and yet they haven't produced it. And so the conclusion is that a missing envelope means a missing text. What else can you conclude? Now, we get to Monsignor Capovilla. The eyewitness comes forward. We know that on July 5th, 2006, he met with Soledeo Paolini. Paolini asked him a lot of questions about the third secret of Fatima, and during that first meeting, the Archbishop said, basically, you write to me. I'll send you something I have, maybe a phrase. He didn't really want to talk about it during this first meeting. So on July 18, 2006, a package arrives in the mail from Monsignor Capovilla. Now, this is interesting in itself. We're told in 2000, that's all there is to the third secret of Fatima, the vision of the bishop in white. Rest easy, we're not hiding anything. But here is Monsignor Capovilla, the last living eyewitness, assisting Paolini by sending him a package of documents in the mail. Why would he do that? In the package of documents, in answer to the question whether there's a missing text, he says, nulla so. That's a Sicilian expression, which means essentially, that's nothing I can talk about. I don't want to get into this. I know nothing. But in the confidential note that was included in the same package, we read, and this is a contemporaneous notation by the Archbishop, not something he made up recently. This is back in the 1960s, that a text of the secret contained in the papal apartment in the Capovilla envelope was read on June 27, 1963, not March 27, 1965, as the official account claims. And the text, as I've said, was kept in the Barbarigo desk, not in the Holy Office archives. And then the decisive testimony. I'm going to load this all onto the screen at once. When he gets the package in the mail on July 18th, and when he sees this discrepancy in dates, and he sees the answer in writing, nulla so, I really don't want to talk about it, please, I don't want to go there, he makes a telephone call to Archbishop Capovilla. And he says, of course, Excellency, but how do you explain this certified discrepancy? What does he mean by the certified discrepancy? Well, the certified confidential note says that Paul VI read a text of the secret in 1963, and that note was certified as an official document as part of his personal files, and it had a stamp, an official stamp on it. How do you explain that discrepancy? Monsignor Capovilla. We had a reading in 1963, but the Vatican says it was 1965. Capovilla says maybe the Bertone envelope is not the same as the Capovilla envelope. Maybe. Paolini asked the fateful question. So, both dates are true because there are two texts of the third secret. And then there's a dramatic pause as Paolini recounts the event. And Capovilla replies, precisely so, per l'appunto. He could not be more unequivocal than that. Yes, there's a second text. And that would seem to be the end of the matter. We have a living eyewitness who confirms the existence of a second text. On top of everything else we've gone over, the evidence is overwhelming at this point. Which brings us to reason number 18. Archbishop Capovilla has never retracted what he said to Paolini. Now, we have another fact that came forth today, fact number 34. According to DeCarli, there is some correspondence from Capovilla to Bertone, in which, according to De Carli, who, remember, told us that there are things on the back of an envelope that clearly aren't there, according to De Carli, this private correspondence indicates a retraction. And when we asked him for a copy of that correspondence today, he said, well, that's private correspondence. You can't see that. Even though it goes to the heart of the controversy, even though it would have settled this matter, at least from their perspective, they have never published this private correspondence that we're not allowed to see. Now, what would you do if you were sitting on a jury and the defense attorney said, well, my client retracted that version of events. He retracted his confession to the police in a private letter he sent to the police department. And you're asked to produce that letter during the trial. Well, I can't produce that letter. It's private correspondence. Take my word for it. I retracted it. Now, the other thing is that Capaldi has avoided even mentioning Paolini's name. Now, consider this. If he had sent a letter to Cardinal Bertone retracting his testimony to Paolini, why would he not say so publicly? When he was produced as a witness during the telecast of September 2007, why did he not say right then and there, oh, I retracted that testimony. I sent a letter to Cardinal Bertone retracting it. Here's the letter. I'll display it for you right here on camera. Why did he not mention the letter? Why did he not even mention Paolini's name when it would have been a simple matter for him to repeat right then and there on TV as part of the videotaped interview the same retraction we are told today for the first time in years was mailed privately to Bertone? Does that sound credible to you? That there's a private retraction out there somewhere that no one is allowed to see? And Paolini's testimony has been published to the entire world by Antonio Socci in his book, in my book as well, and I have not heard from Monsignor Capaldi telling me that he's retracted that testimony. Socci has not heard from Monsignor Capaldi saying, how dare you publish that fabricated testimony that I have retracted. Not one word from Capaldi to anybody by way of protest, objecting to the publication of his testimony. There is no retraction. And Capaldi meets with Paolini again on June 21st, 2007. So not only does he give the decisive testimony in the package of documents that arrived in July of 2006, he has another meeting almost a year later with Paolini, the supposed fabricator. And they have another private conference together. Now, why would he do this if there were nothing to hide? What are they talking about? Packages of documents coming in the mail, confidential notes revealing a reading in 1963, and a further private meeting on June 21st, 2007, and there's another revelation during that meeting, which we'll get to. Reason 19. Bertone has not even asked Capaldi to deny what he said to Paolini. Bertone had every opportunity to publish the retraction we now hear he received from Capaldi. He has never done so. He has never even mentioned Paolini by name and all of this controversy. And the conclusion is Bertone knows Solideo Paolini is telling the truth. He has to know it, because if he didn't know it, he would have come forth publicly, shown us this so-called retraction, and put the matter to rest. He never did so. Reason number 20. This is an explosive point, so it just exploded. Bertone has failed to produce the Capaldi envelope, even though he admits that it exists. We heard no credible explanation today for why that envelope hasn't been produced. No credible explanation. We heard an invention. Because, as I said, we have the photograph of the back of the envelope. That's not the Capaldi envelope because it doesn't contain all of those critical details written on the back of the envelope. Number 21. We know there were two sealed envelopes pertaining to the third secret of Fatima. Why do we know this? Because Cardinal Bertone showed us two envelopes on camera. Two identical sealed envelopes of Lucia's bearing the express order of Our Lady that the contents were not to be revealed until 1960. Now, there's a principle in law called false in one, false in all. If you believe that a witness, and this is a standard jury instruction, if you believe a witness has lied about one thing, you're entitled to discredit that witness's entire testimony. If he lied about one thing, chances are he could be lying about anything. For 7 years, Cardinal Bertone maintained that Sister Lucia had confessed to him that she never received any directive from the Blessed Virgin linking the secret to 1960 and warning that it was not to be opened until 1960. For 7 years, he maintained that, knowing that he had in his possession 2 envelopes which state on the outside that by express order of Our Lady, the secret was not to be opened until 1960 by the Bishop of Fatima or the Patriarch of Lisbon. He had those envelopes with the express order of the Virgin recorded on them in Sister Lucia's own handwriting, and yet he told us with a straight face for 7 years that there was no such order. Is he credible as a witness after having done that? I would say no. And that's why we have to focus on the fact that he was making that representation for 7 years, and moreover, he was saying for 7 years there was one envelope. When he met with Sister Lucia to authenticate the envelope that he says contains the only authentic text of the third secret, he referred to a single envelope. He had her authenticate, as it says in his book, one envelope, una busta. Questa è la mia busta, she said. This is my envelope, singular. And yet he shows up on camera with 2 sealed envelopes from Sister Lucia, each bearing a 1960 warning on it. Now, why would you have 2 envelopes like that if there were only one text that was not to be opened until 1960? And why would he fail to mention the 1960 warnings on 2 separate envelopes? Why would he fail to mention that for 7 years if he didn't think that was something to hide? Number 22, there's a 3rd envelope from Sister Lucia that we never heard about before. In the book L'ultima Veggente di Fatima, Bertone reveals that when he met with Sister Lucia in 2000 to authenticate what he says is the authentic text, and the only authentic text, she authenticated as well, or had in her possession, an outer envelope addressed to the Bishop of Fatima, which we have yet to see. Plus the outer envelope by the Bishop of Fatima himself, plus 2 outer and inner envelopes, for a total of 4. We have the 2 sealed envelopes with the 1960 warning, the outer envelope of Sister Lucia, an outer envelope by the Bishop of Fatima. 4 envelopes in total were shown on camera during the Porta a Porta telecast. 4 envelopes for one text? Does that make sense? Or is it not more logical to assume that there's one outer envelope and one inner envelope for each of 2 different texts? 2 sealed envelopes for the text itself, 2 outer envelopes to contain each of the sealed inner envelopes. Reason number 23. Bishop Venanzio saw only one inner and one outer envelope when he held up that famous envelope to the light just before the secret was transmitted to the Vatican. He held it up like this. It was a bright light. He could see through the envelope. He saw an inner envelope. He took the measurements of that inner envelope and the text inside, which was slightly smaller than the inner envelope. And all of this is recorded in the Fatima archives. He saw one envelope. Now we're told there were 2 envelopes. He saw an inner and an outer envelope. Now we're told there are 4 envelopes. 2 outer envelopes and 2 inner envelopes. What is going on? Clearly, we have some mixing and matching going on. Things are being introduced that were hidden from us before, but only perhaps the envelope and not the contents of the missing text itself, which remains, as Sochi says, well hidden in the Vatican. Number 24, the discrepancy in measurements. We know that Bishop Venanzio measured the inner envelope that he saw when he held up to the light as 12 by 18 centimeters. And the text inside was 8 or 9 by 14 or 15 centimeters. Folded over, apparently. Bertone displayed on television, in the Porta a Porta telecast, an envelope 9 by 14, not 12 by 18, the one that Venanzio measured. A 9 by 14 envelope is not a 12 by 18 envelope. That's all there is to it. So the envelope that Bishop Venanzio held up to the light is a different envelope. And the folio that Bishop Venanzio saw inside measured 9.25 by 8 by 14 or 9 by 15, whereas the one that Bertone displayed on camera was 9.25 by 12.6. 2 different documents. And Sochi noted this fact on his website. Number 25, the discrepancy in what was authenticated. I've touched on this already. And last visionary, Bertone states that she authenticated sheets, fogli, plural. In Italian, this is a folio, a sheet of paper. And we know that the vision is contained on a folio that is folded in half to make a sheet that they call, what is it, piegata. It's piegata, it's folded. When a folio becomes a piegata, a folded piece of paper, it remains a folio. It's still one sheet of paper with 4 reading pages. 1, 2, 3, 4, but still a folio. And yet, during the meeting with Sister Lucia, she authenticated fogli, sheets of paper, and only 1 envelope. And yet we now see on camera at the Porta event, 2 envelopes and only 1 sheet of paper. What happened to the other sheet? Well, today Mr. DeCarli said, oh, I made a mistake. I said fogli many times, 3 times, 4 times, and even today he said fogli several times, until we pressed him on that issue. And he said, oh yeah, well that was a mistake. Well, it's coincidental perhaps that this mistake was corrected after I brought the attention of the Vatican to it in my book, which focused on the fact that she authenticated more than 1 sheet of paper, but they've only produced 1 sheet of paper. Perhaps it's a mistake. I tend not to believe it after everything else we've seen. Number 26, we're racing toward the conclusion. There's yet another mysterious envelope. And last visionary, Cardinal Bertone, refers to an outer envelope that's not Lucia's, bearing the note, third part of the secret. He refers to this in the last visionary of Fatima. Where's the envelope that says third part of the secret? It wasn't displayed on Porta a Porta. He showed us 4 envelopes. That's not one of them. Another discrepancy worth noting. Number 27, the new authentic text line. After Sochi's book came out, a lot of pressure was applied to the Vatican to give explanations for all of these discrepancies we've been exploring. And all of a sudden, Cardinal Bertone began speaking not of the text of the third secret of Fatima, but of the authentic text. He made 2 interesting statements. He said on Porta a Porta, I was present at the time of the meeting when the Pope decided to publish all that actually existed, look at the italicized phrase, in the archives of the Holy Office. All that actually existed in the archives of the Holy Office. Now, he knew at the time he made that statement on Porta a Porta that there was a huge controversy raging all over the Catholic world about a text in the papal apartment, not the text that actually existed in the Holy Office archives. So what he's saying there implicitly is, we published the text in the archives, but not the text in the papal apartment. He can't deny that there was a text in the papal apartment because everyone now admits that there was a Capovilla envelope containing a text in the papal apartment. But he's focusing on the archives of the Holy Office. And then he says further on in the broadcast that the folio, the single page he produced on camera, is the only authentic folio. The only folio in which is contained the third secret. L'unico folio autentico. L'unico folio in cui è contenuto il terzo segreto. What is this emphasis on an authentic folio all of a sudden? Sochi picked up on that. And he said, well, they're clearly implying that there's another text somewhere that they have deemed not authentic. And remember, Lucia authenticated sheets, not simply a folio. Reason number 28, the curious testimony of Bishop Seraphim of Fatima. When there was a subsequent telecast after Porta a Porta, the one I've referred to, in September 2007, Bishop Seraphim of Fatima came forward and he purportedly witnessed Sister Lucia's authentication of the text of the vision in April 2000 with Bertone present. And here's what he said on camera. The secret of Fatima has been revealed in an authentic and integral way. Okay, so let's assume you're on a jury and there's a witness who testifies. He's asked the question, did you reveal the entirety of the letter you received from Mr. Jones? And the witness doesn't say yes or no. He says, well, I revealed the letter in an authentic and integral way. What would you as a juror think about that kind of testimony? You would think that that witness is hesitating and is hiding something. What does he mean, an authentic and integral way? That calls for a yes or a no. Did you reveal the entire letter or not? Yes or no? Not in an authentic and integral way. But those are code words. They're telling us implicitly, clearly, that they deem what was published on June 26, 2000 to be enough of the vision to constitute an integral revelation of it. And Sochi explores this in his book. He says that they arrived at a compromise solution. The compromise solution was indicated by Bertone in the previous slide. They decided to publish what was in the archives. And then John Paul II would go to Fatima to talk about chapter 12, verse 4 of the book of the Apocalypse, about the tail of the dragon dragging souls from their exalted stations, bringing them down to the earth so they would fall from their stations in a reign of corruption in the church. And of course, book 12, chapter 4 of the chapter 12, verse 4 of the book of the Apocalypse has nothing to do with the vision of the bishop in white. There's no reference to that in the vision. So John Paul II is clearly referring to something else. And that was the compromise solution, as Sochi says. That would allow them to say, we've published it, and John Paul II has sort of explained to you whatever was lacking. Number 29, Capaldi, as I mentioned earlier, speaks again. He has a meeting, another meeting with Solideo Paolini on June 21st, 2007. And that meeting is audio taped. Notice that Bertone never audio taped any of his meetings with Sister Lucia. What did Capaldi, Mr. DiCarli, tell us today? Oh, he did something much better than a tape recording. He made some notes. Again, put yourself in the jury box. Key witness has recorded 10 hours of conversation, but not on an audio tape. He says to the jury, oh, I did something much better than an audio tape. I have these notes, you see. I made some notes. We don't need an audio tape. Just rely on my notations. I'm perfectly reliable as a witness. What do you need to hear an audio tape for about a matter on which the fate of the entire world might depend? Just rely on my notes. And of course, I have no axe to grind. I'm not trying to defend an official position. I'm not trying to avoid embarrassment. So trust me. But anyway, this conversation was audio taped. And Il Giornale reported on September 22nd, 2007, that on this audio tape, which Sochi played for the reporters outside the hall where Bertone was staging his September 2000 television show, on this tape, which he played before he was kicked out of the building by security guards, the newspaper quotes the following statement: besides the 4 pages of the vision of the bishop in white, there was also something else, an attachment. Yes. And that's about a year after Capaldi has met with Solideo Paolini in July of 2006, and about a year after he sent the package of documents, and about a year after he said, per l'appunto, in response to the question, are there 2 texts? So that's further testimony. And that attachment, of course, has never been revealed. But, not only that, reason 30, there's no denial that there is an attachment to the text of the vision. No denial from Capaldi, no denial from Bertone, no denial from the Vatican. Nobody denies it. And yet Il Giornale published this testimony to the entire world. There's an audio tape. Capaldi says of the tape, there's an attachment. They know that that testimony is out there for the world to see, and yet they have conspicuously failed to deny it. Would they fail to deny it if it were false? Would they not have angrily sallied forth immediately and said, wait a minute, there's no attachment. This is nonsense. This is a fabrication. Not a single word by way of denial from any of these people. Number 31, the mysterious official refusal to investigate pertinent questions. They know what the issues are. The issue is the et cetera. The issue is the second folio, the Capaldi envelope in the papal apartment, as opposed to the text in the Holy Office archives. They know that people simply don't believe that the message of Fatima ended with et cetera. They know all of these issues. But they never asked Sister Lucia specifically about the et cetera. Sister Lucia, what did Our Lady have to say in the space occupied by your et cetera? What did she say after she made reference to the dogma of the faith in Portugal? The whole world would like to know. Sister Lucia, I am here from the Vatican, I, Cardinal Bertone, to get to the bottom of this matter. Please tell us what Our Lady said within that et cetera that you put into that message, that precious heavenly message, to reserve the place for what the Virgin obviously said. The one question everyone wants an answer to is the one question he failed and refused forever to ask. He simply would not ask the question. No questions about the text of the secret in the papal apartment. Why don't they tell us about the contents of the Capovilla envelope? Why don't they produce the Capovilla envelope? Why don't they ask Capovilla, gee, was there in fact, as you said to Soledad Paolini, 2 texts? Look at the transcript of the interview that they published parts of in the September 2007 telecast. Nowhere is he ever asked during that September 2007 telecast a specific question. Did you say to Soledad Paolini, yes, exactly so, in answer to the question, are there 2 texts? Are there 2 texts, Monsignor Capovilla? The vision and an explanation of the vision. Is there an explanation of the vision, Monsignor Capovilla? In the video we saw today, he said the vision was the the nucleus of the 3rd secret. Why would he say it's the nucleus instead of simply saying that's the 3rd secret? Why would he employ a word like nucleus, which is only a part of something, clearly? Nucleus is not the whole thing. He's hedging. No questions about the testimony of Paolini, not one, despite what we've heard today. All we have is a private letter that no one can see. Number 32, no official response to Antonio Socci. Now, he's written a book publicly accusing Cardinal Bertone of a cover-up of the very words of the Mother of God. And remember, if you don't know already, Antonio Socci started out not believing a word of our position. He was absolutely convinced we were wrong. This was a crazy conspiracy theory. And then he started to look at the facts, as I have done. And the more he saw of the facts, the more convinced he became that the so-called Fatimists were right. He reversed himself. And now he's completely convinced of the opposite, that there has to be a missing text. And so he wrote a book which basically says Cardinal Bertone has covered up the words of the Mother of God. And what does the Vatican say about this by way of a condemnation of this calumny? Nothing. Bertone has written a book to answer Socci, but doesn't answer him. You saw what happened here today. There was no real answer to any of the serious objections we've lodged. There were only evasions and on-the-spot improvisations, like Bertone's improvisation after the 4-minute commercial break. Well, maybe Cardinal Bertone mistook 62 lines for 25 lines. And the Vatican has never condemned Socci for his accusations. Why wouldn't the Vatican do so? If Socci is telling falsehoods about the Cardinal Secretary of State, the Vatican has to do something to correct that. Publicly, directly, with great publicity and fanfare. It hasn't done so. We have a book prepared by De Carli after a meeting with Cardinal Bertone, put out by a private publishing company, which De Carli had the audacity to suggest today was the official position of the Catholic Church, until he admitted under questioning that it really isn't the official position of the Catholic Church. Which brings us to the final reason. The Pope thanks Socci for his book. Now, Mr. De Carli said today, well, you know, Bertone has a letter from the Pope saying he's read the book and he approves its publication. And what Socci got from the Pope was just a formality. Just a formality. Why did the Pope have to send anything to Socci? He sends him a note, as Socci reports on his website, concerning my book, thanking me for the sentiments which have suggested it. Now, Socci has launched the most serious conceivable accusation against the Vatican Secretary of State, and he gets a note from the Pope thanking him for the sentiments which suggested this accusation? Not a word of rebuke from the Supreme Pontiff for this supposed calumny against the Vatican Secretary of State? Why would the Pope say nothing by way of correction or rebuke or reprimand? Why would he send a courteous note, even if it was only a courteous note? And I submit it's more than a courteous note. The Pope does not accuse Socci of having made false accusations. That, to me, is practically dispositive. If you send a book to the Pope containing false accusations, and the Pope reads that book and sends you a note thanking you for it, he has pretty much vouchsafed the accuracy of what you've written in the book. At least he doesn't object to it. So consider the implications of that. So what's the verdict? I'm going to let Antonio Socci state the verdict in his own words. And again, this was a man who started out believing the opposite of the conclusion he finally reached. Cardinal Bertone, he writes, has scored the most sensational goal against himself. He demonstrated involuntarily that, as a matter of fact, the explosive part of the 3rd secret of Fatima exists, yet is well hidden. And he further writes that there is part of the secret not revealed and considered unspeakable is certain. He's absolutely convinced, and I don't see how any open-minded observer can fail to be absolutely convinced. And where does that leave us? I'm going to wrap up by telling you in a minute or two where we stand. Obviously, we're in danger because the secret foretells, as everyone has indicated, with any knowledge of the matter, a twin chastisement, a crisis in the church which clearly we are in the midst of, and a concomitant chastisement of the whole world. That's clearly what the vision is all about. A wounded, limping pope escaping a half-ruined city, climbing to the top of a hill, is executed by a band of soldiers, and we're told that that's John Paul II, recovering from his wounds and returning to the ski slopes. Please. So we are in danger of a twin chastisement. And as John Salza explained, the message of Keto also reflects a twin chastisement. And so does the message of Akita, fire raining down from the heavens, in connection with the crisis in the church. But there is hope. There is hope, and I'm going to conclude with the reasons for our hope. And no one has said it more eloquently than Antonio Socci in his magnificent book, which I had the privilege of translating from the Italian. We have hope because we're in the hands of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And as Socci writes, since the episodes of the Gospel, Mary is she who succors everyone, always ready and merciful, she who hastens caringly, who embraces tenderly, who consoles and heals. It is not by accident that before Fatima, there was the great event at Lourdes, where the Holy Virgin manifested to modern humanity the infinitude of her compassion for the suffering, the desperate, and for each human being. The beautiful Lady of Nazareth, courageous and so sweet, is she who always defends everyone. She who stands in humble silence and wishes only that men know her Son. She who lived, literally taking on herself the sufferings of the Son together with him. She who serves. She who sees need and hastens even before help is asked of her. She who never abandons anyone. She who gladdens and dries tears. She who is illumined by joy, singing the marvels of the God who has mercy on all, who exalts the humble and fills the hungry with good things. In the centuries, it has never been heard, writes St. Bernard, that anyone who has made recourse to her protection, implored her help, or sought her assistance has ever been abandoned by her. She never abandons anyone. It is never too late, Sister Lucia has heard to say, to entrust oneself to the Sacred Heart of Jesus and to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. It's not too late for us. And in the end, her Immaculate Heart will triumph. Thank you.
The Blessed Virgin gave us a message how to have world peace, that only she can help us. But perhaps we don't get enough perspective. We say, well, nothing dramatic has happened. And it's because our commentators, our newspapers, our editor writers, the people that we really pay attention to, the people that speak on television, in the mainstream press and so forth, people who are under the pay of the enemy often, have yet to point out to us that since we have despised Our Lady's message as the human family, we've despised it, there have been 1,686,570,000 violent deaths as a direct result of ignoring Our Lady of Fatima. That is, again, 1 billion. That is 1 with 9 zeros after it, plus another 686 million people who have died violently for the one simple reason that we've ignored Our Lady of Fatima. We could point out, perhaps another time, that if this is not enough perspective to give us that in these 95 years of ignoring Our Lady of Fatima, we have paid a tremendous price. But as bad as that is, that price will be doubled or tripled in the next couple of years if we ignore her much longer. Just a few months ago, the world's population passed 7 billion people. 7 billion people. Scripture tells us, and other prophecies tell us, that 1/3 to 2/3 of the entire population of mankind will be wiped out in this war to come. I don't know what it takes to wake us up. Maybe we have to find it on NBC or CBS or some commentator in the New York Times before we finally take this seriously. And maybe we say to ourselves, we take it seriously, but I think we don't take it seriously enough. We have many priorities. Sometimes I wonder how I get through my day between what I'm supposed to do today, between getting up and doing my reading, doing my other work, talking to people that God wants me to talk to and so forth. And we only all have 24 hours a day. And I'm sure that my life is not as busy as the bishops and the Pope. But we must make this priority number one. There is nothing more serious, nothing more important, nothing more urgent than Our Lady's message at Fatima. And this is something that I don't know how to say. I remember getting a letter from an older bishop many years ago. I think he was in Ottawa. And he said to me basically in his letter, Father Gruner, if you would not raise your voice so much, if you would not yell at us, we might start paying attention to you. And I wrote back to him and I said, I appreciate very much your interest and your concern and your advice. Now, if you can tell me how I can do that any better than what I'm doing and get the attention, I'd be very happy to do it. I hate yelling at people. I hate raising my voice, and I hate trying to draw attention to myself. But there's no other way around on this message. If there's something more important, and certainly yesterday we were in this March for Life here in Rome, and the number of people that are killed by abortion since about 1975, by the statistics we looked up, is about 1,300,000 people. And by war, there's another 78 million people. And then by government murder, not only in Russia and China, but other parts of the world, 238 million people. These are catastrophic, and they lead us to think that we are, as Pope Pius X, St. Pius X said, that we are in the days just before the coming of the Antichrist. These things that are happening to us, which Pope Benedict, when he was Cardinal Ratzinger, said, that refer to this Fatima message is found in sacred scripture, that we are living the times of the apocalypse. And although we can be distracted with everything from daily newspapers to new movies or whatever else it is that entertains us, these things are happening around us, and they're happening every day. And they're happening in such a way that how can we deny that we're living in, if it's not the apocalypse, if it is not the time coming before the Antichrist, it is the best, shall we say, preview or event which the world has never seen before. Just looking at the Catholic Church, for example, the only other time in church history that comes close to this time is the Arian crisis, when 90% of the bishops were Arian. And there was only about 3 or 4 bishops who actually stood up, and the greatest of them all, St. Athanasius, was actually excommunicated by the Pope in 357 AD. Now, he wasn't really excommunicated because, as the Church has always recognized, as St. Thomas points out, that law is not something that just the legislator says. Law is the ordination of reason. It is for the common good. And as the Church law to this day points out that no one can be punished if he doesn't commit a crime. So because Athanasius was standing up for the faith, because he was defending the faith, which was his duty to do, he could not be punished even if the Pope pronounced a sentence of excommunication. In fact, Liberius regretted his action, but Liberius is the first Pope not to be canonized from the time of St. Peter to the year 357. It's well for us to remember then that we need not be afraid of the judgments of men if we are on the right side of God. It's a principle that we need to keep in mind. We also have to understand that prophecy is a function in the church. It's a function that will never go away. It's a function that must be respected, just as the apostolic offices must be respected. As St. Paul tells us in Ephesians, the church is built upon the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, not just the apostles. The role of prophecy is essential. Scripture tells us that we must not extinguish the Spirit. We must not despise prophecy, but we must test all things and hold fast that which is good. So that is why I've promoted the message of Fatima, not only because it's unique among all the messages, but of course it's been approved by the Church. As Father Joseph St. Marie pointed out here in Rome, he's the one who wrote the speech for the Pope in 1982 when he went to Fatima. Father Joseph St. Marie points out that it is the role of the hierarchy to judge, to test whether the prophet speaks the truth. But once the hierarchy recognizes that the message comes from God, then the Pope himself and the bishops are bound to obey, not the prophet, but God who speaks through the prophet to them. That obligation is primordial. That is not for us to say, I'm telling the Pope what to do. No, but Our Lady of Fatima is telling him what to do. All I do is explain what it means. I answer the objections of theologians or others who haven't had the time to think about it. So when we get back to 1917, Our Lady comes. She comes and gives a message to show mankind the way to peace. She was asked, she was insisted that she come. She comes and she explains. And then for the next 95 years, we basically ignore her. So our Lord himself, in 1931, explained to the Pope and the bishops something, a lesson from history. He said, make it known to my ministers, given they follow the example of the King of France, in delaying the execution of my command, like the King of France, they will follow him into misfortune.
I have come to warn the faithful to amend their lives and ask pardon for their sins. They must not continue to offend our Lord, who is already deeply offended. In the final vision on October 13, 1917, Our Lady silently held out the scapular, a gesture which indicates that she wants everyone to wear it. Our Lady said, "If my requests are not heeded, Russia will spread her errors throughout the world, raising up wars and persecutions against the Church. The good will be martyred. The Holy Father will have much to suffer, and various nations will be annihilated."